You notice them at the back of every classroom, corner of the cafeteria, edge of the playground. They watch, they listen, they remember everything. But nobody talks about what's actually happening inside their heads. The hypervigilance, the pattern recognition. The neurological difference that turns childhood into a constant surveillance operation. Who are these quiet observers? What gives them their almost supernatural ability to read a room? And why does science show they might be processing reality in ways the louder kids never will? Every school has maybe 5 to 10 of them per 100 students. The kid who says nothing during group work but somehow knows exactly who cheated on last week's quiz. The one who can predict when the teacher's about to lose it 3 minutes before it happens. They're not daydreaming. Brain scans from 2024 prove they're running threat assessments you wouldn't believe. A study published in Frontiers in Psychology in August 2025 by researchers Benjamin Sharp and Ian Tyndall at the University of Chichester showed human attention sustains focused observation for approximately 25 minutes maximum before performance drops. But these quiet kids? They're not sustaining attention, they're cycling it. 5-minute bursts across multiple targets. Classroom door, teacher's micro-expressions, who's texting under the desk. It's not focus, it's tactical awareness. Developmental psychologist Marty Olson-Laney documents that introversion shows biological markers as early as 4 months old. Cortical arousal levels measured higher in introverted infants. What does that mean? Their brains run hotter, process deeper, store longer. By age 2, researchers at Ludwig Maximilians Universität München in Germany tracked empathic concern in children across 18 observation points, between 6 months and 18 months, published March 2024 in Cognitive Development. Lead researcher Marcus Paulus found that quiet observation of others' distress activated specific neural pathways 6 months earlier than previously documented. These kids aren't learning empathy from talking about feelings, they're absorbing it by watching faces. University of Central Lancashire researcher Pamela Qualter ran 3 studies with 573 children aged 8 to 12, published 2012 in the Journal of Abnormal Child Psychology. Eye tracking technology revealed lonely children, often the quiet ones sitting alone, demonstrated quadratic relationships with hypervigilance for social threat. Translation: moderate loneliness created the most intense observation patterns, not the extremely isolated, not the socially comfortable. The ones in between developed what Qualter called hostile attribution scanning. They watched for rejection cues and faces showing neutral expressions, saw exclusion where none existed. This wasn't paranoia, this was threat prediction based on incomplete data. The brain filling gaps with worst-case scenarios because missing a threat could mean social death. This script is researched and factual, using sources from peer-reviewed publications, including the 2024 study by Schultner and colleagues in Science Advances published June 28th, analyzing observational learning across 1,550 participants, showing observers acquired prejudices merely by watching biased actors interact with groups, and the 2025 mindfulness research by Clemens Bauer at MIT published January 31st in Biological Psychiatry, demonstrating how observer effects reshape measurement validity in psychological research. Now back to the information. Test subjects viewing progressively reconstructed images. The ones with accumulated thematic knowledge recognize patterns 30% faster than naive observers. Quiet kids accumulate thematic knowledge by watching. They build databases. Sarah sits in 7th grade English for 3 weeks. Never speaks. But she knows Marcus always taps his pencil before asking a question. Knows Mrs. Henderson adjusts her glasses when she's about to call on someone who isn't paying attention. Knows Tyler's voice drops half an octave when he's lying about finishing homework. She's not memorizing. She's encoding behavioral algorithms. Within 300 milliseconds of seeing a social stimulus, introverted nervous systems already processed it differently, granted preferential access to attentional resources in introverts. For extroverts, social stimuli got no special treatment. The researchers tested this with faces versus flowers as oddball stimuli. Introverts showed massive P300 responses to faces. Extroverts, nearly identical responses to both. The introvert brain tagged social information as priority data, requiring immediate deep analysis. John Brebner proposed the unified model of extroversion in 1985, Australian psychologist. His framework: introverts generate more excitation during stimulus analysis. They can't help it. Environmental information comes in, and their brains light up harder than extroverted brains. The cost? Slower response preparation. Introverts inhibit action longer. They hesitate before answering phones, before raising hands, before speaking in groups, not because they're afraid. Because their brains are running parallel processing on 6 possible response outcomes, while the extrovert already blurted out the first thing that came to mind. David Schultner and Björn Lindström led a team studying how observers acquire information from watching others. 1,550 total participants across 6 experiments. The finding that changes everything. Observers watching prejudiced actors interact with social groups unconsciously adopted those prejudices despite zero awareness they'd learned anything. The observers attributed their acquired biases to the behavior of the group members themselves, even though both groups behaved identically. The quiet kid watching isn't just collecting neutral data. They're learning social hierarchies, power dynamics, and unconscious biases by pure observation. No participation required. They took longer comparing working memory contents to external targets. But here's the twist. They weren't slower because they were worse at it. Dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and basal ganglia, areas modulated by dopamine and connected to the reticular formation in the brainstem, showed different activation patterns in introverts versus extroverts. The introvert brain didn't scan faster. It scanned deeper, more thorough comparison. Pattern matching against more extensive memory stores. They picked up on the hidden pattern faster. Unconscious, statistical learning, the brain detecting structure in chaos without conscious awareness. This matches with Fisher, Wick, and Fredrickson's 1997 PET scan findings of greater subcortical activation in introverts' basal ganglia. The quiet kid isn't trying to figure out your routine. Their brain is automatically extracting the algorithm. They speak up, they participate, they shine in group work. The 25% who are introverts, they sit differently. A study on Finnish 9th graders published in Frontiers in Psychology, October 2020, examined introversion and social engagement across 862 students. Researchers found introverts with high social engagement showed higher self-esteem than introverts with low engagement. But here's the problem. Schools force social engagement through group work, through participation grades, through constant collaboration. Introverts narrow their experiences but go deep. Extroverts spread wide but go shallow. Neither approach is wrong. But one gets rewarded and the other gets pathologized. Creativity researchers note most creative people across fields identify as introverts. Solitude isn't loneliness, it's the crucible for innovation. You can't think deeply about complex problems while simultaneously managing social interaction overhead. The brain can't run both processes at peak efficiency. So the quiet kid opts out, retreats, recharges, and in that silence, makes connections the chatty kids miss because they never stop talking long enough to think. Research on extroversion, introversion, and memory task performance found introverts have higher cortical arousal levels, enhancing memory consolidation and storage abilities, long-term retention advantage. Extroverts showed better short-term memory, 2 different systems. The extrovert remembers what happened yesterday with high fidelity. The introvert remembers what happened 3 years ago with high fidelity. In one University of Western Ontario study, researchers predicted extroverts would outperform on recall tasks, but the data showed introversion enhanced certain types of memory encoding. When information gets tagged as personally or socially relevant, the introvert brain archives it in different structures. This is why the quiet kid from elementary school remembers the embarrassing thing you did in 2nd grade that you completely forgot. Not all quiet observation is healthy. When childhood involves trauma, neglect, unstable environments, or abuse, hypervigilance becomes maladaptive. The Redeemed Mental Health Analysis, published April 2025, identifies hypervigilance symptoms, fixation on potential threats, exaggerated startle reflex, difficulty relaxing, constant tension. What starts as a survival mechanism in unsafe environments continues inappropriately in safe contexts. The nervous system doesn't recalibrate. Fight or flight stays activated. Chronic stress response becomes baseline. For these kids, being quiet isn't temperament. It's survival strategy. They're monitoring for danger that may not exist anymore, but their amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, keeps screaming alerts. Children experiencing abuse, neglect, natural disasters, war zones exhibit hypervigilant behaviors. They scan environments for threats compulsively. Physical symptoms manifest: elevated heart rate, sweating, difficulty concentrating. Social symptoms: suspicion of others, catastrophizing, strained relationships, inability to function in work or school. The quiet kid in the corner might be introverted, or they might be quietly terrified. The National Center for Biotechnology Information's 2024 update on childhood PTSD notes hypervigilant behavior as common presentation: poor eye contact, fearful or anxious affect, constricted affect, indicating emotional numbing. The child watches everything because not watching means potential harm. Clinicians look for persistent and exaggerated alertness to potential threats, difficulty feeling safe, physiological symptoms of arousal, and significant impact on daily functioning. The introverted child who enjoys solitude and deep thinking is not the same as the hypervigilant child who can't relax even in objectively safe environments. One is temperament. The other is nervous system dysregulation, requiring therapeutic intervention. The Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences published February 2024, a landmark study on social transmission of empathy. Chinese Academy of Sciences researchers had female participants observe empathic or non-empathic reactions from others, then provide their own empathy ratings. Observing empathic reactions increased participants' empathy. Observing non-empathic reactions decreased it. The transmission mechanism? Observational reinforcement learning. The anterior insula, brain region correlating with empathy, showed altered responses based on what participants observed. Functional connectivity between anterior insula and temporoparietal junction changed. You literally rewire empathy circuits by watching how others respond to suffering. The quiet kid seeing 1,000 instances of adults ignoring homeless people? Their brain learns ignoring is appropriate. The quiet kid seeing 1,000 instances of adults helping? Different circuit formation. Different person. The review documents how observational learning happens across species: rodents, birds, primates, humans. The mechanism: observing features and behaviors of social conspecifics and environments to acquire novel information, updating the observer's knowledge base. Social facilitation versus imitation. In facilitation, the model acts as an implicit source about the shared environment. In imitation, the observer mentally represents the model as suitable for mimicking behaviors to achieve goals. Humans excel at imitation. It requires higher order social cognition. The quiet kid watching the popular kid navigate social situations, not just admiring, encoding behavioral scripts, learning the algorithm for social success, even if they never execute it. Journal of Neuroscience. November 2020 published Linking Social Cognition to Learning and Memory. Social encounters facilitate new learning and modify pre-existing memories throughout the lifespan. The ventral CA1 hippocampal subregion processes what researchers call social engrams, memory traces of social information. Calcium imaging identified specific cells encoding social experiences. When you watch two people interact, your brain creates a memory structure linking their identities, their emotional states, their power dynamics, their behavioral patterns. The quiet observer isn't just watching two people talk, they're building a relational database. Person A plus person B equals this dynamic. Change one variable, add person C, and the predicted dynamic shifts. They test these predictions silently, updating their model with each observation. Hine and colleagues found in 2016 study that learning processes influence how much one person empathizes with another's pain. Lockwood and colleagues this same year documented neurocomputational mechanisms of prosocial learning linking to empathy. You don't just have empathy or lack it. You learn empathy through observation and experience. The circuitry is plastic, modifiable. The quiet kid who seems eerily perceptive about others' emotional states? They've logged tens of thousands of observations. They've watched microexpressions, tracked voice tone changes, correlated body language with outcomes. They built a sophisticated model of human emotional signaling because they had nothing else to do during all those hours of silent observation. Statistics say no. Most quiet kids are just quiet kids. But the media loves a narrative. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, Parkland. The shooters were described as quiet, isolated, observant. But correlation isn't causation. Millions of quiet kids never harm anyone. The danger isn't the quietness. The danger is the untreated trauma, the festering resentment, the lack of intervention when isolation becomes pathological. Hypervigilance research from University of Central Lancashire shows lonely children at moderate isolation levels show the highest threat sensitivity. Not the extremely isolated, but moderately isolated. They're still connected enough to experience rejection. Still disconnected enough to catastrophize. That's the zone of maximum danger, when observation shifts from information gathering to grievance collection. They're collecting data because their brains are wired to process information deeply rather than broadly. The University of Illinois pattern recognition research shows the human visual system uses complex information processing. James Jerome Gibson called direct perception. What you see first isn't individual features, it's whole objects, patterns, gestalts. But introverts see different patterns than extroverts. They're looking for different information: social threat, power dynamics, deception markers, emotional incongruence. They're not paranoid, they're thorough. Let's run specific mechanisms. Harvard Graduate School's National Scientific Council on the Developing Child published foundational research on early childhood brain development. The architecture of the developing brain composes of highly integrated neural circuits wired under continuous mutual influences of genetics and environment. Genes determine when specific brain circuits form. Individual experiences shape how that formation unfolds. The serve and return nature of children's engagement in relationships with caregivers literally shapes brain architecture. But what about the kid whose caregivers don't serve and return? The kid who watches instead of participates? Their brain architecture develops differently, not broken. Different. They encode observational learning pathways more heavily than interactive pathways. When monkey B watches monkey A perform that action, the same neurons fire in monkey B's brain. Humans have analogous systems. We simulate observed actions in our own motor cortex. The quiet kid watching you tie your shoe is running the motor program in their head, even though their hands aren't moving. They're learning by observing, not by doing. When this happens thousands of times across thousands of behaviors, they build a massive library of action patterns they've never physically performed, but their brain has simulated repeatedly. Usually studied in contexts of groups and mobs, but the quiet observer experiences it alone. They watch someone have an anxiety attack. Their brain's emotional centers activate in sympathetic response. They're not having the anxiety attack, but they're feeling it through observation. Do this enough times, and you develop what psychologists call empathic distress. You're so good at feeling others' emotions that you start experiencing chronic emotional fatigue from constantly simulating everyone else's inner states. The quiet kid who seems exhausted by social situations isn't tired from interacting. They're tired from feeling everything while saying nothing. University of Chichester's Benjamin Sharp published August 2025 in Frontiers in Psychology Research, demonstrating human attention limited to approximately 25-minute durations, maximum before vigilance decrement occurs, but the study examined focused attention on single tasks. Quiet observers aren't maintaining focused attention. They're rapidly cycling attention across multiple targets. Peripheral vision study, published December 2011 in Journal of Vision by Hans Strasberger, found peripheral vision limited in pattern categorization by distinctly lower representational complexity and processing speed. But peripheral vision handles motion detection superbly. The quiet kid isn't staring at you. They're using peripheral vision to track 6 people simultaneously while appearing to look at their desk. It's a surveillance technique. Loneliness and hypervigilance showed quadratic rather than linear relationships. Low loneliness, low hypervigilance. Extreme loneliness, lower hypervigilance. These kids checked out, stopped caring about social threat. Moderate loneliness, maximum hypervigilance. These are the kids still trying, still hoping, still scanning for acceptance while expecting rejection. The hostile attribution bias, interpreting neutral social cues as threatening, peaks in this zone. They're not misreading cues due to incompetence. They're overinterpreting ambiguous cues based on extensive experience with rejection. If 90% of your social bids historically got rejected, your threat detection threshold reasonably lowers. You see rejection earlier to protect yourself sooner. Australian psychologist Brebner's unified model predicted introverts would show slower reaction times due to greater stimulus analysis, confirmed by decades of research. But slow isn't bad. It's strategic. The extrovert answers the question immediately with 70% confidence. The introvert answers the question 5 seconds later with 95% confidence. Which approach is better depends on context. Pop quiz. Extrovert wins. Complex problem requiring deep analysis. Introvert wins. School system rewards speed over depth, time tests, rapid-fire questions. Quick participation. The quiet kid who needs processing time gets penalized not for being wrong, but for being slow. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, impulse control, long-term planning, matures last. But observational learning and pattern recognition rely on different circuits. The amygdala, processing emotional responses and threats, matures earlier. The basal ganglia, handling procedural learning, comes online early. Quiet kids, leveraging observation-based learning strategies, are playing to their neurological strengths during developmental windows when their social verbal circuits are still wiring. They're not choosing to be quiet. They're adapting to the hardware configuration their brain currently runs. The Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences 2024 empathy study proved you can increase or decrease empathy purely through observation. No direct experience required. The quiet kid watching 100 social interactions learns social patterns the participating kid might miss because they're too busy performing to observe. It's the difference between playing in the game and studying film. Both teach you, but they teach different aspects. The 75% extrovert statistic applies primarily to Western cultures. Eastern cultures show higher introversion rates and cultural validation of quiet observation. In Western schools, the quiet kid is a problem to be fixed. Participation grade systems explicitly punish observational learning styles. Why don't you talk more? You need to contribute. Are you paying attention? These phrases don't mean your learning style is different. They mean your learning style is wrong. Art. But research from China, Japan, Korea shows quiet observation correlates with higher academic achievement in those systems. Not because Asian kids are smarter, because those educational systems don't penalize quiet processing. If you value documented psychological research and neuroscience like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the 2025 work by Sharp and Tyndall on sustained attention paradoxes, showing theoretical impossibility of perfect vigilance, the 2024 research by Qualter's University of Central Lancashire team using advanced eye tracking to measure social threat hypervigilance, and the 2024 study in cognitive development by Munich researchers tracking empathic concern development from 6 months to 18 months. Now, back to the information. When quiet observation stems from safe temperament, it's adaptive. When it stems from trauma-based hypervigilance, it's maladaptive. Differentiating requires understanding context. Child grows up in stable home, has friends, functions well, prefers solitary activities, probably healthy introversion. Child grows up in unstable home, avoids interaction, constantly scans for threats, can't relax even in safe environments, probably trauma-driven hypervigilance. The observable behavior looks similar. The underlying mechanism differs completely. One is personality, one is injury. Treatment for hypervigilance. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps patients recognize when threat detection activates inappropriately. Exposure therapy reduces sensitivity to triggers. EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, helps reprocess traumatic memories. Medications like SSRIs reduce anxiety. The goal isn't making them extroverted. The goal is reducing the maladaptive surveillance that prevents them from feeling safe. Some kids will always be observant, that's fine, but they shouldn't feel constantly endangered in objectively safe contexts. The observational learning advantage in adulthood. The quiet kid who spent childhood watching becomes the adult who reads people exceptionally well, job interviews, negotiations, conflict de-escalation, romantic relationships. Every context requiring accurate assessment of others' hidden emotional states favors the person who spent 20 years practicing observation. They pick up on incongruence between what you say and what your micro-expressions reveal. They notice when your story doesn't match your body language. They detect deception not through magic, but through pattern matching against thousands of previous observations. Most quiet observers don't weaponize this knowledge, but some do. The con artist, the sociopath, the master manipulator. They're often described as quiet, observant, and unusually perceptive. They watched, they learned. They applied that learning toward exploitation. The skill itself is neutral. The application determines morality. Age 5. Seriation ability develops, arranging items along quantitative dimensions. Age 7. Hostile attribution bias can emerge in lonely children. Age 12. Peak hypervigilance in moderately lonely kids. Age 18. Prefrontal cortex still developing, but observational learning databases robust. Age 25. Prefrontal cortex matures, and observational insights gain executive function oversight. The quiet kid becomes the perceptive adult. Cortical arousal differences mean better memory consolidation. Study after study confirms this. Short-term memory, extroverts win. Long-term memory, introverts dominate. The quiet kid who seemed to barely pay attention remembers the lecture better 2 weeks later than the kid who actively participated. Why? Less cognitive load during encoding. They weren't splitting attention between performing and learning. They were pure learning. The recorded information went straight into storage without the interference of simultaneous output. They're not consciously looking for patterns. Their basal ganglia automatically extract structure from chaos. You change your routine. The extrovert doesn't notice for a week. The introvert notices day one, not because they're monitoring you deliberately, because their brain flags pattern deviations automatically. User typically enters room at 8:05 a.m. User entered at 8:15 today. Flag anomaly. This happens unconsciously. It's procedural learning in action. Social skill deficits can develop from insufficient practice. You can't learn social skills from observation alone. You need interaction, feedback, correction. The kid who only watches might understand social dynamics theoretically, but lack the motor execution practice to implement strategies smoothly. It's like learning to play piano by watching videos. You understand what to do, but your fingers don't have the muscle memory. Observational learning provides the algorithm. Interactive practice provides the implementation ability. Need both. When you watch others interact for years while remaining on the sidelines, you build increasingly elaborate models of how social interaction works. The problem? Your model becomes so complex that attempting interaction feels overwhelming. I need to monitor my body language, voice tone, word choice, their microexpressions, the group dynamics, the status hierarchy, the context appropriateness, and 12 other variables simultaneously. The extrovert doesn't think about this. They just talk. The quiet kid thinks about all of it. The cognitive load paralyzes them. The quiet kid might develop a rich inner life but struggle to manifest it externally. They know who they are in their head. Translating that to external behavior requires social risk-taking they've spent years avoiding. Result? Delayed identity consolidation. They figure out who they are later than their extroverted peers. Not worse, delayed. Proper differential diagnosis requires understanding whether the behavior stems from temperament, trauma, neurodevelopmental differences, or mental health conditions. A kid who's quiet because they're introverted doesn't need medication. A kid who's quiet because they're depressed does. Getting this wrong means either pathologizing normal variation or missing genuine mental health needs. Millions of quiet kids exist. Statistically, nearly zero become violent. But the stereotype persists. The quiet kid gets flagged by threat assessment teams, gets pulled into counselor offices, gets treated like a potential danger. This social stigma can actually increase isolation and resentment, potentially worsening outcomes. The vast majority of school shooters showed multiple specific warning signs beyond quietness: violent ideation, fascination with previous attacks, access to weapons, documented threats. Quietness alone predicts nothing. Safe, predictable environments, gradual exposure to triggering situations, medication if needed. Different mechanisms require different interventions. One-size-fits-all approaches fail. The ability to observe silently and extract patterns is a superpower in many adult contexts. Detective work, psychological assessment, teaching, counseling, research, writing, strategy, analysis. Every field requiring deep understanding of complex systems favors observational thinkers. The kid struggling in loud classrooms might thrive in graduate school, might excel in careers requiring sustained analysis. Their childhood adaptation becomes their professional advantage. By age 18, the quiet observer has logged maybe 50,000 hours of social observation. That's more than the 10,000 hours Malcolm Gladwell claims creates expertise. They're experts in human behavior, not through study, through observation. They've seen patterns, exceptions, edge cases. They've built predictive models. Their accuracy isn't 100%, but it's probably 70 to 80%, which exceeds untrained observers' 50% base rate significantly. Vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. These aren't just therapist problems. The quiet kid experiencing these by age 14, they've absorbed thousands of other people's emotional states, witnessed suffering, watched injustice, observed cruelty. They couldn't intervene. They just watched. This creates a kind of helpless omniscience. You see everything. You can change nothing. That combination breeds either deep compassion or cynical detachment, sometimes both. But clinical observation suggests quiet childhood observers tend toward specific adult profiles. Some become therapists, using their observational skills professionally. Some become writers, translating observed human behavior into fiction. Some become researchers, studying the patterns they spent childhood noticing. Some become extremely successful in business, reading people and situations with preternatural accuracy. And some struggle lifelong with anxiety and isolation, never having developed the interactive skills to leverage their observational insights. The extrovert can develop observational depth. Neither is locked into childhood patterns. But the early developmental windows matter. The 10,000 to 50,000 hours of observation create neural infrastructure that persists. You can build new pathways, but the old ones remain. The adult who was a quiet kid might learn to function as an extrovert, but under stress, they'll revert to observation mode. It's their fallback, their home base, the groove worn deepest in their neural architecture. Nobody ran a 50-year study tracking quiet childhood observers into old age. We don't know if their observational advantage persists, if their social skill deficits resolve, if they're happier, sadder, or equivalent to childhood extroverts by age 70. Anecdotal evidence suggests mixed outcomes, heavily context-dependent, type of quietness matters, temperament versus trauma, intervention versus neglect, social support versus isolation. The quiet kid with understanding parents, a few good friends, and adults who respected their learning style? Probably fine. The quiet kid with critical parents, no friends and adults who punished their silence? Probably struggled. The quiet observer now has new material. They watch people interact with screens, watch people perform identity online, watch the gap between curated digital personas and actual behavior, new patterns to learn, new discrepancies to notice. The quiet kid of 2025 sees things the quiet kid of 1985 never encountered. Digital body language, parasocial relationships, influencer dynamics. They're building observational models for a social world that didn't exist 20 years ago. The therapeutic community is slowly catching up, recognizing that temperament isn't pathology, that observation is a legitimate learning style, that quiet kids aren't broken extroverts. The shift from fix them to understand them took decades, still incomplete. Still fighting against institutional structures built for extroverts by extroverts, but progress visible. Accommodations for quiet kids, alternative participation structures, recognition that diversity in cognitive styles benefits groups even if it makes classroom management harder. Here's what we know for sure. The quiet kid in the corner is probably running sophisticated cognitive processes you can't see. They're not daydreaming, not checked out. They're watching, learning, building models, detecting patterns. Some of them are doing this because their brain is wired for deep processing. Some because trauma taught them surveillance keeps them safe. Most, combination of both, temperament amplified by experience. They're in a career you didn't expect. They reference something you said in 7th grade that you forgot immediately, but they remembered perfectly. They describe exactly what was happening in that classroom that year, with an accuracy that shocks you because you thought they weren't paying attention. But they were. They were always paying attention. They were just paying attention quietly. The University of Central Lancashire archives hold the eye tracking data. Children aged 8 to 12. Lonely kids scanning faces for rejection cues. The heat maps show where their eyes went. Mouth, brow, hands. Scanning for microexpression tells. Looking for the facial asymmetries that leak true emotion through practice masks. They weren't just looking, they were analyzing. Running facial recognition algorithms manually. Human pattern matching at speeds approaching milliseconds. 573 children. Hundreds of thousands of individual eye movements. Coded, analyzed. Showing that lonely children literally see the social world differently than connected children. Not metaphorically, literally. Their eyes track different features. Fixate longer. Saccade faster. This isn't belief. This is measured behavior, captured, quantified, reproducible.